Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Eric Larson Day, so we're taking a look at The Defenders issue number 1, cover dated March 2001 from Marvel Comics. If you remember, the comics boom of the early 90s kind of led to the creation of Image Comics and them selling millions and millions of copies of each issue that they would release. Well, at some point around 1994, the bubble burst and sales numbers went down quite a bit, quite drastically. And at that point is when the first kind of, I guess, Image, if you want to call them defectors, moved back to Marvel, Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld, with the Heroes Reborn deal. Mostly for economics. It's been rumored and talked about that their contracts were somewhere in the millions of dollars, so makes total sense economically at that point, if your own books at Image aren't selling quite as much as they were before, to move on to Marvel and kind of have guaranteed money, I guess, at that point, right? And much to the ire of Todd McFarlane back then, who was very vocal about his disapproval of that deal. But it went through anyways, and they worked on flagship titles. Jim Lee doing Fantastic Four and Iron Man, not drawing it, of course. You know, he was doing Fantastic Four, Whilce Portacio was doing Iron Man, and then Rob Liefeld doing, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Captain America and Avengers, and he didn't even finish out that run. Eventually, there was some sort of disagreement. He left, and Jim Lee actually finished all 4 books for that first year run of the books. I think it was 12 issues, and then the characters were reintegrated back into the regular Marvel Universe. Anyways, we'll be looking at those books at some point in the future as well. Just to put you into context, so by the time Larson moves over to Marvel in 2001, you know, the ice has been broken, and I think out of all the founding fathers of Image, the only guy who never went back to any mainstream company, Marvel DC, is Todd McFarlane. I know, again, now we know Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson did, and the other 2, Mark Silvestri did for sure, and did some X-Men stuff, and did some Batman stuff more recently. And Jim Valentino, I don't know for sure, but I feel like somewhere there's a distant memory of him doing something for Marvel. I could be wrong with that. Let me know in the comments. But now we're going to talk about Defenders. Really enjoyed this book. First of all, first issue, it's got 38 pages, lots of bang for your buck, and just some really, you know, cool Eric Larson art. I would expect no less from Eric. He's very consistent and has been all throughout his career. So if you enjoy his art, any book you buy with his art is going to be satisfying, I'm pretty sure. And this one is also does not disappoint. I appreciate this issue as well because I feel like what they're going for is kind of a old school Marvel vibe, kind of 60s Jack Kirby kind of deal. In the storytelling and the layouts and stuff. So as I go through the book, I'll be comparing what I see here to kind of that early 60s Marvel vibe, which again, you know, Eric Larson works well within. He's got a bit of that Jack Kirby inspiration, a bit of that Walt Simonson kind of style that works really well. All are sons of Kirby, and he's really adept at channeling that Kirby energy and style, which again, I will point out as we go through the book. Pretty fun, kind of by the numbers cover, just, you know, dynamic shot of the main members of the Defenders coming at you, and I will say Larson, I think, is very well suited to drawing the Hulk, one of those artists who for some reason is just really adept at handling that character. Let's crack her open, have a look inside. So starting off, we've got just kind of a, you know, the generic head in the sky shot of, again, the 4 main Defenders characters: Namor, Doctor Strange, Silver Surfer, and the Hulk, and a bit of a cityscape down here to let us know, more than likely, at least I feel like this is taking place in New York City. It certainly has that New York City vibe, right? And, you know, most Marvel stories, you know, can go around the world and stuff, but just like they were published in New York City, you know, and a lot of the artists and writers lived and worked in New York City, it makes sense that that would be kind of the home base. And the distinction with DC Comics, right, is that in the Marvel Universe, they're using actual real cities as opposed to imaginary cities based on real cities. Right away, I'm going to talk about the coloring. There's some pages where I find the coloring's fine. It works. On these pages here, maybe not so much here, but this one here, it's very kind of dark and murky. And I feel like, you know, there's a vibe to it because we're dealing with an alleyway and trash and stuff, but it just feels a little too dark here for my taste. But, you know, that's just a little bit of nitpicking. The way the book is structured, we're going to be introduced to each of the kind of the main players with a short kind of few page sequence for each to bring them into the storyline. Here we've got Patsy Walker Hellcat, who's a member of the Defenders, who's going to kind of bring in the whole intrigue that's going to be followed up on later. She helps a homeless gentleman out, brings him into the Tommy's Joint Sandwiches and Cocktails, feeds him, and he mentions if I can only reach mother, and she obviously assumes it's his mother, right? Where does your mother live? Around here. And he is to specify not my mother. And later on, we're going to find out where that goes. This sequence here kind of, to me, shows a little bit about the layout and storytelling used within this comic that I would, I guess call kind of a hybrid of image storytelling and old school Marvel storytelling, where this page I feel is a little bit more modern. It's got the full bleed panel. The long vertical panels are very popular in the 90s and with Image Comics in general. And then we've got a more classic kind of 6-panel grid here that's much more in tune with the 60s Jack Kirby style that I mentioned earlier. And boom, right away, we're thrown right in the thick of things with a double page splash establishing some sort of alien invasion, very reminiscent of some stuff I looked at recently in the Savage Dragon with the Mars Attacks crossover. And again, very adept at establishing the scene here. We've got the Washington Monument, so that clues you in as to where it's going on. A bunch of buildings down here. Not sure if this is accurate to Washington, but, with these kinds of buildings and domes and some of the architecture, definitely, I don't think anyone would be questioning exactly where this takes place with one quick glance at this page here. The ship's design is a little strange. To me, it looked almost like a frog or an amphibian or a newt or something, and that'll make more sense as we go through the storyline as to who these aliens are, right? Once more, the end of the world. Excuse me. So Kurt Busiek and Eric Larsen are the writers, and Eric Larsen, Klaus Janson are the artists. So I'm going to assume that there's kind of a plot coming from Kurt Busiek that maybe is interpreted by Larsen, or maybe they work on the plot together, and then Kurt Busiek comes back and does the dialogue. Not 100% sure on that. I don't know. But I feel like, because of the vibe of the book and what they're going for storytelling-wise and that old Marvel kind of feel, that they would be working Marvel method. Interesting to see Eric Larsen, who's been inking himself for years now, be inked by someone else, by Klaus Janson, who I think does an amazing job. And as opposed to other artists, I think Klaus Janson kind of tends to overtake when he inks them. I think their styles work perfectly together, where we don't lose any of the Eric Larsen, but we do get a bit of the Klaus Janson feel here and there. And I'll point out examples of that as we go through the book and exactly what I mean there. Chris Eliopoulos is the letter and Gregory Wright is the colorist. So we're basically kind of reuniting the early Savage Dragon creative team that originally Eric Larsen basically brought over from when he was working on the Spider-Man book in the early 90s for Marvel. So next sequence is another short few page sequence where we're introduced to the Hulk. So as the jets are sent off to attack the aliens, obviously they're no match. And, we've got a classic kind of sequence here where the Dr. Bruce Banner turns into the Hulk. I thought something interesting here. They call him Dr. Robert Bruce Banner here. So kind of incorporating also, his original name from the comics, but the name from the TV show from the 70s. I guess at this point, maybe it's become canon that he has both names. And then boom, we get the money shot of the Hulk, which I think is just awesome. Here's another, like I said, an example where I can see in some of the hatching, a little bit of the Klaus Janson, right? And the thick, bold lines. But I feel like almost, Eric Larsen's natural inking style is almost complementary and similar to Klaus Janson's. So this really works well, I think. And I talked before about the Kirby inspiration, which I definitely see with the extreme foreshortening and the big fist and stuff. But also, I will state this, that there's a huge Walt Simonson vibe to this drawing here. There's a Walt Simonson cover on the Hulk series that I don't think Eric Larsen necessarily swiped or homaged in any way, but is very similar to this. And, all these dynamic lines here and the hatching, definitely feel like some Walt Simonson stuff on this splash page here. And I love the fact that the Hulk is so big that, even on this full bleed page, part of his fist and his arm go outside the frame, part of his knuckle here, part of his foot, he just can't be contained by the page. And even this sequence here, there's something about it that I just feel is very Walt Simonson in its depiction of the Hulk, the hair and stuff. It just feels very familiar to stuff that Walt Simonson has done in interpreting the Hulk artistically. And again, the Klaus Janson not overpowering here in any way, and letting Eric Larsen's natural style shine through. Again, probably because they are so complementary. Here's an example here. We see Doctor Strange in his astral form. Here's an example where maybe a little bit more of the Klaus Janson is taking over, but I think, Larsen's anatomy and construction and composition is so strong that we still get that energetic Eric Larsen vibe. And In this sequence, again, we're introduced to another heavy hitter in the series, Doctor Strange. Harkening back again, I think, to his very first appearance, or early 60s appearance. Now, we're not talking about Jack Kirby, of course. We're talking about Steve Ditko. And I had to go back and look at that first appearance where Doctor Strange, originally kind of had more of an Asian appearance, like he was of Asian descent. So Larsen kind of bringing that back here, I feel. And just as I was looking through the book, I just thought his mustache was so odd, right? It's almost like he's got two mustaches. He's got a regular kind of goatee mustache, and then he's got a pointy, twirly evil guy mustache. Going back to that original Ditko design, that was there in the beginning. So I feel like that's what definitely what Erik Larsen is channeling here. And then these characters here, the borers, they're called, from the negative zone. I mean, if you can't see the Jack Kirby influence on the way he's drawn these guys, then you really don't know about the King or comics or Marvel comics and in general. We're getting those thick slashing Jack Kirby lines here. And Klaus Janson also clearly is understanding what Erik Larsen is going for and really pushing that even further through his inks. And again, we're talking about layouts and storytelling. These pages maybe not quite as much, old school Marvel style, but they are not... Sometimes they're full bleed and sometimes they're not, and I find interesting the mix of both. So like on this page where you've got a panel within the page and you've got this image kind of being full bleed off to the sides, I feel like there's a mix of everything at this point. More of a modern look mixed in with that early 60s look that really works well, I think. And all of a sudden the back of these pages, these ones were white in the negative space, these ones are black. I don't know if it seems like it's probably going to be a conscious choice just for the Doctor Strange sequence. I'll keep an eye out for that. Something I've seen Larsen use a lot in the Savage Dragon is also the 4 panel page like this, with a lot of action kind of happening in each page, definitely based on the Jack Kirby style of storytelling from the 60s. And I mean, these 2 pages here are just pure kind of Kirby vibe and action and energy and lines all over the place. This character here, the Nightcrawler, I'm going to have to assume that that's Jack Kirby design. I don't see how it wouldn't be, or, someone really trying to ape Jack Kirby in the design of the character. Looks really cool, though. Now we're being introduced again, the black goes away, so to a new character. This is Namor in Atlantis, once again, being pissed off about the surface world, polluting his waters and not respecting them and stuff. The typical kind of dialogue and monologue that we get from Namor. One little detail that I noticed here in this issue, Namor's got an earring. Does anyone know when that actually first appeared? I don't feel like he had that in his original, late 30s, early 40s appearances. At what point did Namor start wearing an earring? Don't know where that comes from, and I'd just be interested to know where that started. Another 4-panel action sequence here that works really well. Here's a page where, I don't feel like we're losing any of the Erik Larsen, but on these further away shots, maybe we're feeling a little bit more of the Janson influence in the inks and stuff, some of the rougher lines and the fingers. And then when we get up close, if you told me that Erik Larsen had actually inked to this panel, I would probably believe you. I don't see much Klaus Janson other than the further away elements like the feet here. There's always a bit of a roughness and sketchiness to Janson's stuff where sometimes he lets lines kind of come through and doesn't, correct them, which is fine. I'll go back to the cover just for a quick example of what I'm talking about. I noticed here, on his hand, this line that goes behind the index finger really shouldn't go through it, but he just kind of left it. And does it in any way destroy our enjoyment of the art? Not at all, because it all looks really great. I just noticed that, Janson will allow for things like that sometimes, and it kind of adds to the energy of the art. Great splash page here of Namor, some great background characters, beautiful layering, I think, all the way throughout there. This sequence introduces the Silver Surfer, and once again, I definitely feel like there's some classic kind of Kirby texturing happening to give us that, shiny Silver Surfer texture. We've got Elisa Masters here, and here's an example where sometimes maybe the art goes a little overboard in its reverence of Jack Kirby. This to me definitely looks like an Erik Larsen lady face, if I can put it that way, but then all of a sudden when we get up close here, this really does look like a Jack Kirby face. Not hiding their influences on this one at all. And a shot like this with all the foreshortening and the action impact lines and stuff, how could you not see Jack Kirby in that? Attacked by Quasimodo. Back to the Hulk sequence here. Love this shot of Hulk throwing something at the ship here in the impact. Just looks really great, really dynamic. You know, Larsen once again really mastering those energy lines and hatching that Kirby is known for. And basically is able to ascertain from this Lizard Man character here that they're not actually there on purpose to attack Earth. They were supposed to be going somewhere else, but they ended up in Washington. And of course, that's going to further the mystery. Hulk's going to wonder, well, how did they get here, right? We're going to find out it's from this guy here, Warlord Ka, who to me really harkens back to really early 60s Marvel. And what I found out is that he's basically a character that was introduced in Strange Tales. So I'm going to assume he was like a Doctor Strange villain. And he's kind of the mastermind behind all of these events here. And he's got a secret base in this lighthouse where we're reintroduced to, is it Patsy Walker, I believe? Yeah, and her transformation now into Hellcat to allow her to escape. And furthering the mystery, she's, you know, walking around the evildoer's lair only to find this giant imprisoned woman looking a little worse for the wear. Her name is Gaia, so we're to assume she's the spirit of the earth, right? And not a Kirby design, I don't think, but definitely some Kirby and Ditko inspiration when it comes to her costume design. Here's a page where we introduce Nighthawk, who is a member of the Defenders, and art-wise, this is one of those pages where I feel like we're getting a little bit more Klaus Janson. I've talked about this before when other inkers ink specific artists. It's in those faraway shots and small details that you can kind of pick up more of their artistic vibe. So I definitely feel like that's a Klaus Janson face. And even this shot here, even though I do recognize it as an Erik Larsen kind of composition, it does end up feeling a little bit more Klaus Janson-y, if I can say that. And he's, you know, typical superhero. He's the head of a corporation, right? Kind of like Green Arrow or Bruce Wayne, or, you know, that old trope. Hellcat has escaped and contacts her buddy Nighthawk, who is, you know, a member of the Defenders. And, you know, them talking about getting the Defenders together to face this new menace. Love the design of this character here. Again, don't know for sure if this is a prior character that exists in the Marvel Universe or if that's an Erik Larsen design, kind of once again channeling what I feel is a very Jack Kirby kind of vibe. Just weird looking characters with globulous heads and big mouths, right? It's kind of a Jack Kirby staple. So as the Defenders, the original members, right? Silver Surfer, Namor, Doctor Strange, and the Hulk kind of meet up here. Right away, they're at odds. Namor, you know, he's got a huge ego. The Hulk, not very smart. So they start to square off, and Silver Surfer interrupts just in time before too much damage is caused. And, of course, conveniently, Hellcat shows up. Always like these shots in the foreground where there's a dark kind of monochrome color for the character in the foreground and some more representative colors in the back. I think that always works really well. And, you know, basically cluing them in on the mother that they're looking for, that she says is the giantess that she encountered in this guy's lair. So now we can see his full design here. And again, when you look at this, to me, this just screams early Marvel, early 60s Marvel. And at that time, I feel like maybe Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby styles weren't quite as distinct as they would become maybe just a few years later, and some of the same design elements are being used in both Jack Kirby designs and Ditko designs, and they're kind of complementary to each other, where, you know, other than Spider-Man, which is a Ditko design, Jack Kirby could probably, you know, pull off a lot of the Ditko designs, and Ditko could pull off a lot of the Jack Kirby designs. We get a bit of backstory, which clues us in on the fact that this character, you know, was first introduced way back in Strange Tales. He appeared in the first appearance of the Defenders, right? So we get a little bit of back history there. And just a funny line here where I guess at some point in Defenders 119, he showed up as a lady here. And this line here, Hulk liked Floating Man best when he was fuzzy-haired girl. I just thought that was kind of hilarious for Hulk to say that. And boom, our villain summons even more creatures here. And again, I'm not quite sure. The Ravagers of Creation is what they're called. There's 4 of them. I don't know for sure if these are, you know, originally Jack Kirby designs or Steve Ditko designs, or, you know, some are Jack Kirby, some are Steve Ditko, but they definitely have that look and are in that vein, and definitely taken inspiration from that. Again, I don't know if these are previously established characters. Let me know in the comments if they are, but they definitely have a very Kirby-esque and also Steve Ditko vibe. And just to point out, I figured it out as I was going through the book. I don't think it's specifically mentioned, but they're meant to represent, I feel like, the 4 elements, right? So we've got earth, fire, water, and air. Here's a shot, once again, where maybe Larsen didn't detail it quite as much, and I feel like a little bit more of the JANSON influence shines through. And then we get a pretty cool action sequence all the way throughout here. You know, I would expect nothing less from Larsen. He's a master at this kind of Marvel-style action. And, you know, big hits and big impacts all the way throughout. Does a great job of it. Some awesome foreshortening. And again, you know, I talked about the storytelling kind of mixing modern and old school Marvel 60s storytelling. I feel like there's a bit of that here where, you know, the actual paneling and layout is very 60s Marvel. That 4-panel, you know, Kirby-inspired action page I've talked about before in Savage Dragon. Larsen was using it there as well. But then to have stuff go out of the frame and out of the page and into the bleed and stuff, got it down here too, is definitely much more of a modern thing than a 60s Marvel thing, which wasn't happening back then. So anyone looking for kind of, you know, a more modern interpretation of that old school Marvel storytelling, maybe not as cheesy, maybe not as dialogue heavy, I definitely feel like at least this first issue of the Defenders is right up your alley. I really enjoyed it, to be honest. Really fun comics, really dynamic stuff. Again, bang for your buck for 38 pages in that first issue. I don't think subsequent issues will be that long, although we'll find out as we go through them. But yeah, just something about this that just has that early Marvel vibe that's just really fun and interesting, and just enough action and just enough plot to keep you going along throughout. So after all of that, Gaia finally is released here, and all is right in the world, it says, or was it? And I guess we're going to find out next issue if that's actually true or not. Again, layout-wise, this is one of those pages where I feel like you've got the full bleed vertical panel, right? And then he kind of squeezed in what would usually be, you know, the 6-panel grid on the page off to the right. So again, a mix of new and old, which I think works really well all throughout this book. This shot of the surfer at such a tilted angle, really cool. The fact that he's bursting out of the panel as well on his way to wherever he's going, I think is cool. And just this interesting shadow here that's really just a big S that's been drawn. A bit of a line here, but, you know, just a big kind of Kirby squiggly line. Really simple and really works graphically to highlight the Silver Surfer's and his surfboard's shininess, right? Back to this character that I really like his design and his look. And that's where we're going to be left off this issue of the Defenders, issue number 1. There you go, guys. That is my review. If you're still watching and you are subscribed to the channel, thank you so much. I really do appreciate all your support. If you are watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you, and it really helps the channel out, helps us grow, and helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So once again, thank you all, and have an awesome day. King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby. Like!